What if your DNA could tell the story of an entire continent? Imagine unlocking a genetic map that not only traces your ancestry but reveals how centuries of migration, mixing, and cultural shifts have created something truly unique. That's exactly what American DNA represents, a mosaic of countless journeys, struggles, and triumphs that make it unlike any other in the world. But what makes it so special? Why is the DNA of Americans not just diverse but also a living testament to human history itself? In this video, we'll unravel the incredible story of American DNA, from its deep origins in East Africa to the waves of migration that shaped the nation's genetic identity. Along the way, we'll explore how historical events like colonization, the transatlantic slave trade, and modern immigration have left their mark on our genes. Stick around as we dive into the science, history, and surprising discoveries that explain why the DNA of Americans is so distinct. Whether you've ever wondered about your own ancestry or are simply fascinated by what makes us human, this journey is sure to amaze you. So, let's get started. What does your DNA say about the story of America? To understand what makes American DNA so unique, we first need to look at where it all began: East Africa. Modern genetic science has revealed something truly remarkable. All humans share deep ancestral roots in this region. In fact, about 85% of all the genetic variation found in humans can be traced back to East Africa. This isn't just a random fact, it's the starting point for one of the greatest migration stories in history. Around 60,000 years ago, early humans began spreading out from Africa, carrying with them the genetic building blocks that would shape populations across the globe. Over tens of thousands of years, these groups adapted to new environments, developed unique traits, and began to diverge genetically. But despite this incredible journey, humans remained a single species, with more similarities than differences in our DNA. Now, fast forward to roughly 25,000 years ago. A group of humans, the ancestors of today's Native Americans, embarked on an extraordinary migration. They crossed the Beringia Land Bridge, a now submerged stretch of land connecting Asia and North America. These early settlers braved harsh conditions, navigating ice-covered landscapes to reach the Americas. Once here, they spread rapidly, populating the continents in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. Through ancient DNA studies, we've discovered that these early populations weren't just pioneers. They were incredibly diverse. Genetic evidence reveals two major groups, often referred to as Northern and Southern Native Americans, who went on to create a rich tapestry of cultures and communities. This foundational layer of American DNA, deeply rooted in the first migrations, would later be joined by waves of newcomers from across the globe. So, the story of American DNA starts not with one group or one place, but with a shared human origin and a series of incredible migrations. From East Africa to the icy expanses of Beringia, this DNA tells the story of adaptability, resilience, and a desire to explore the unknown. And yet, this is only the beginning of what makes American DNA so unique. The unique story of American DNA truly comes into focus when we examine the waves of migration that followed the initial settlement of the Americas. Each wave added new layers to the genetic tapestry, creating a diversity unlike anything seen before. Let's dive into these key moments that shaped the DNA of modern Americans. First, there were the indigenous peoples. These early settlers, the descendants of those who crossed the Beringia Land Bridge, spread across the continents, forming distinct genetic groups. Archaeological and DNA evidence from sites like Spirit Cave in Nevada and the Anzac Burial in Montana reveal just how diverse these early populations were. The Anzac child, for example, has genetic ties to both North and South American indigenous groups, showing that these ancient people moved quickly across vast distances. Fast forward to the colonial era, when Europeans arrived, bringing not just new cultures but also new genetic contributions. Western Europeans, particularly the English, became the first major contributors to what we now recognize as American DNA. Later, Spanish conquistadors and settlers brought genetic diversity to the Americas, especially in Central and South America. Surprisingly, studies have also revealed smaller but distinct contributions from groups like the Basques, whose genetic fingerprint is found in modern-day Maya populations in Mexico. But perhaps the most significant and heartbreaking wave of migration came through the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas, and their genetic legacy remains a vital part of American DNA today. Most African Americans, for example, trace their ancestry to the Yoruba people of West Africa, though genetic evidence also links populations to regions like Senegal and Gambia. In the Caribbean, African ancestry is even more prominent, with up to 87% of the genetic makeup in places like Barbados tracing back to Africa. What's fascinating is how these populations began to amalgamate, often through forced circumstances. The blending of African, European, and indigenous DNA created new genetic patterns that are still visible today. For instance, African Americans in the southern United States show traces of French ancestry, reflecting the migration of French settlers into the region. Similarly, Italian immigrants contributed to the genetic landscape of places like Colombia and Puerto Rico during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Modern migration continues to add to this diversity. Immigrants from Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America have brought new genetic contributions to the mix, ensuring that the story of American DNA is never static. With every generation, these threads are woven tighter, creating a rich and dynamic genetic tapestry that truly reflects the story of the nation. These waves of migration, some voluntary, some forced, are the foundation of what makes American DNA so unique. They show us how history, struggle, and human connection can leave an indelible mark on our genes. And yet, the story doesn't stop here. The continuous movement of people ensures that this genetic legacy will keep evolving, telling new stories with each passing generation. So, what sets American DNA apart from the rest of the world? It isn't just the individual genetic contributions from different populations, but the way these pieces have come together to form something entirely new, a dynamic and evolving mosaic unlike any other. One of the key factors is amalgamation. In America, populations that were once isolated by geography or culture began to mix at an unprecedented scale. European settlers, enslaved Africans, and indigenous peoples all contributed to this blending, creating a unique genetic fingerprint that reflects centuries of interaction. Over time, physical appearance and genetic ancestry became less reliable markers of heritage as generations continued to intermingle. Take the example of African Americans. Genetic studies reveal that the majority of African ancestry in the Americas comes from the Yoruba people of West Africa. But alongside this, African Americans also show significant European genetic contributions, primarily from British and French settlers. This blending often occurred under tragic circumstances during slavery, but it also highlights the way American DNA became a story of resilience and adaptation. Another unique feature of American DNA is its cultural and historical layering. For instance, populations in Spanish colonies often have genetic links to regions like Senegal and Gambia, where a large proportion of enslaved Africans were taken. Meanwhile, the genetic contributions of the Basques in modern-day Maya populations provide a fascinating glimpse into lesser-known waves of migration. What's even more remarkable is the dynamic nature of American DNA. Unlike regions with relatively static populations, such as Norway or Nigeria, America has been shaped by constant movement and migration. Italian immigrants left a significant genetic mark in places like Colombia and Puerto Rico, while Asian and Middle Eastern populations have added new layers in recent decades. This fluidity ensures that the genetic landscape of America is always evolving. One surprising revelation comes from modern DNA research. Traits we often associate with certain populations don't always tell the full story. For example, dark skin is a common adaptation to tropical climates, yet Solomon Islanders, who resemble sub-Saharan Africans in physical appearance, are genetically more similar to Europeans. Similarly, the sickle cell allele, often associated with African populations, is also found in parts of the Mediterranean and India. These examples remind us that genetic traits are shaped by environmental factors and random chance, not by the socially defined concept of race. This brings us to one of the most important truths about American DNA. It's not defined by borders or even by the idea of American. It's a reflection of humanity's shared history and interconnectedness. The blending of diverse ancestries in America isn't just a scientific fact. It's a powerful symbol of how people from vastly different backgrounds can come together to create something extraordinary. Ultimately, what makes American DNA so unique is its fluidity, diversity, and capacity for change. It tells a story of migration, resilience, and adaptation, a story that continues to evolve with every new generation. And as we learn more about this incredible genetic legacy, we uncover not just the history of a nation, but the history of humanity itself. When we talk about DNA and race, we're often navigating a minefield of misconceptions. Over the centuries, people have tried to use science, or rather, pseudoscience, to justify false ideas about race. But the truth is, race as we know it is a social construct, not a biological reality. And understanding this is key to appreciating what makes American DNA so unique. Let's start with a simple but profound fact. There is no biological basis for race. While humans do show genetic variation based on geographic ancestry, this variation doesn't fit neatly into racial categories. Scientists have known this since the 1940s. In fact, there is more genetic diversity within any single population, like Africans or Europeans, than there is between populations. Take skin color, for example. It's one of the most visible traits used to define race, but it's really just an adaptation to sunlight. Darker skin evolved in regions with intense UV radiation, while lighter skin developed in areas with less sun exposure. That's why populations from entirely different parts of the world, like sub-Saharan Africans and Solomon Islanders, can have similar skin tones but vastly different genetic ancestries. Another myth involves genetic traits like the sickle cell allele. Many people think of it as an African trait, but that's not entirely accurate. Sickle cell is found in regions where malaria was historically common, which includes parts of Africa, the Mediterranean, and even India. It's an example of how environmental factors, not race, shape genetic traits. So, if race isn't biological, what is it? It's a social construct, a way societies have historically organized people based on arbitrary traits like skin color or facial features. In the context of American history, race became a tool of division, used to justify slavery, segregation, and systemic inequality. These divisions persist today, even though they have no scientific basis. This misunderstanding has led to some persistent myths about American DNA. For instance, people often assume there's something inherently American about DNA from the United States. But the reality is, American DNA is simply a mix of ancestries from around the world, indigenous, African, European, Asian, and more. There's no distinct genetic marker that says American, just as there's no genetic marker for French or German. What's fascinating, though, is how science can help us trace these complex histories. Using advanced techniques like haplotype-based analysis, researchers can pinpoint where certain genetic segments originated. This allows us to see, for example, how most African Americans have ancestry linked to the Yoruba people, or how Basque genetics appear in modern Maya populations. These findings tell us about migration, colonization, and the blending of cultures, but they also dismantle the idea of fixed racial categories. Perhaps the most powerful takeaway is this: understanding the difference between race, ancestry, and genetic variation helps us combat harmful stereotypes. For example, the idea that certain groups are naturally lazy or intelligent has no basis in genetics. Human behavior and culture are shaped by countless factors, but genetics is not one of them. By rejecting these myths, we can embrace a more accurate and inclusive understanding of our shared humanity. The story of American DNA isn't about rigid racial divides. It's about connections, adaptation, and the blending of diverse ancestries over time. And that's a story worth celebrating. Science has a remarkable way of uncovering truths about our past, especially when it comes to understanding the unique story of American DNA. With the advancements in genetic research, we've gained tools that allow us to piece together the histories of entire populations, often revealing hidden or unexpected chapters of our shared journey. One of the most powerful tools is haplotype-based analysis. This technique examines patterns in genetic material to identify connections between populations. By comparing DNA from current-day Americans with that of people in Africa, Europe, and indigenous populations, scientists have been able to trace the paths of migration that brought different groups to the Americas. For example, research has confirmed what historical records suggested. The majority of African Americans trace their ancestry to the Yoruba people of West Africa. But genetics has also provided new insights, such as evidence of significant contributions from Senegal and Gambia to populations in Spanish-controlled regions of the Americas. These findings align with records of the transatlantic slave trade but add a layer of clarity and precision that history books alone can't provide. Genetic studies have also uncovered surprises. For instance, the Basques, a distinct ethnic group from Spain and France, left a genetic mark on the Maya population of Mexico. This suggests that Basque individuals either traveled with Spanish conquistadors or arrived in later waves of migration, leaving a legacy that traditional histories often overlook. Similarly, Italian immigrants contributed to the genetic makeup of Colombians and Puerto Ricans, reflecting patterns of migration in the 19th and 20th centuries. Even within the United States, genetic research has highlighted fascinating patterns. For instance, African Americans in the South often show traces of French ancestry, tied to historical migrations of French settlers. Meanwhile, the Caribbean islands, such as Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, have genetic profiles that differ significantly from mainland populations, showcasing a distinct migration history shaped by geography and colonial influences. One of the most profound contributions of science is its ability to validate oral histories and cultural traditions. When indigenous groups claim ancestral ties to specific lands, DNA evidence often supports these connections, bolstering their cultural and legal claims. For example, the study of remains like those from Spirit Cave confirmed a direct genetic link between ancient individuals and modern Native Americans, validating their enduring presence on the land. But perhaps the most exciting aspect of this research is how it continues to uncover previously unknown connections. The blending of genetic data with historical records has created a richer, more nuanced understanding of how populations moved, interacted, and evolved over time. And yet, these discoveries are just the beginning. As genetic science advances, researchers hope to explore populations with even more diverse contributions, such as Brazilians, whose DNA reflects influences from Africa, Europe, and indigenous groups. These studies promise to further illuminate the complexity of American DNA and the stories it holds. In the end, the role of science isn't just about looking at the past, it's about showing us how deeply interconnected we all are. By tracing the journeys of our ancestors, we gain a greater appreciation for the shared threads that bind us together, no matter where we come from. As we look to the future, one question lingers. Could American DNA ever become something truly distinct, a unique genetic identity shaped by centuries of migration and cultural blending? The answer is complex, but what's clear is that American DNA will continue to evolve, reflecting the dynamic nature of its people. One thing that sets the United States apart is its constant flow of immigration. Unlike regions with relatively stable populations, the U.S. has welcomed millions of people from all over the world, each bringing new genetic contributions. From recent waves of Asian and Middle Eastern immigrants to ongoing migration from Latin America, the genetic diversity of the U.S. is ever expanding. This continuous influx of new genes prevents the formation of a fixed or isolated American genome. Another factor is intermarriage. In the past, social and cultural barriers often kept populations separate, preserving distinct genetic patterns. But in modern America, those barriers are breaking down. Interracial marriages are more common than ever, leading to greater genetic mixing with each generation. This blending creates a rich, dynamic genetic landscape that defies simple categorization. It's also fascinating to think about the role of modern technology in shaping our understanding of DNA. As ancestry testing becomes more accessible, more people are uncovering the diverse origins of their genetic makeup. This awareness challenges outdated notions of race and identity, helping us see ourselves as part of a global human family. But what about the idea of a uniquely American genetic identity? Could it emerge over time? For that to happen, populations would need to remain isolated for generations, with little to no mixing from outside groups. This is unlikely in a country as interconnected and globally engaged as the U.S. Instead, what we're likely to see is an ever-evolving mosaic of genes, shaped by the ongoing interplay of migration, adaptation, and cultural exchange. Interestingly, there are smaller groups within the U.S. that could develop more distinct genetic patterns. Communities like the Amish or certain indigenous tribes maintain high levels of genetic continuity due to their cultural practices and relative isolation. But even within these groups, external influences over time are inevitable, adding to the complexity of their genetic makeup. What's perhaps most exciting is how understanding this genetic diversity can shape our future. By appreciating the interconnectedness of our DNA, we can foster a sense of unity that transcends racial or cultural divisions. American DNA tells a story of resilience, adaptation, and shared humanity, a story that's still being written. In the end, The future of American DNA is less about defining a single identity and more about celebrating its diversity. It's a testament to the power of migration, the beauty of cultural exchange, and the unbreakable connections that tie us all together. As science continues to reveal more about our genetic past and present, it offers a hopeful glimpse into a future where our differences are embraced as strengths. American DNA is more than just a collection of genes. It's a living, breathing story of migration, resilience, and unity. From its deep roots in East Africa to the blending of indigenous, African, European, and modern immigrant populations, it tells the tale of humanity's shared journey. What makes American DNA so unique isn't just its diversity, but the way it reflects the challenges and triumphs of history. It shows us how populations that were once separated by geography or circumstance came together to create something truly extraordinary. And it reminds us that our genetic differences are far outweighed by what we share. As we've explored today, the science behind DNA not only reveals our past but helps us understand our present. It teaches us that race is a social construct, not a biological fact, and that our identities are far more interconnected than we might realize. In the U.S., this diversity is a strength, an ever-evolving tapestry that continues to grow with each new generation. So, what does your DNA say about your story? Have you ever wondered about the journeys your ancestors took to bring you here? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this exploration of American DNA as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories behind the science. Together, let's continue to celebrate the incredible diversity that connects us all. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.